My brother David has this habit of buying too much furniture whenever he's happy. That's how I ended up standing in his garage on a Tuesday afternoon, sweating through my shirt, helping him assemble a bed frame that neither of us understood, while his wife Farah sat on a cooler drinking iced tea and laughing at both of us. "You two are useless," she said. "My brother could build this in 10 minutes." I remember laughing along, not really listening because at that point Kyan was just a name. A younger brother I'd heard about maybe 6 or 7 times since the wedding. Studying photography somewhere out east, moving back for a job, that was it, just a name attached to somebody else's life. 3 weeks later, he was standing in my kitchen at 11 at night, holding 2 garbage bags full of clothes, apologizing for something that wasn't his fault. "I swear it's just for a few days," he said. "The lease thing fell through and Farah said you had the extra room and I really didn't want to ask, but—" "It's fine," I said, and I meant it, though I didn't know yet what fine was going to cost me. He was 26, I was 34. I want to say that the gap mattered to me right away, that I had some early warning system that clicked on and told me to be careful. It didn't. What I noticed, if I'm honest, was that he apologized too much, and that he had this way of standing in doorways like he wasn't sure he was allowed all the way into a room yet. I gave him the second bedroom, the one I used for nothing but boxes I hadn't unpacked from a move 2 years earlier. He thanked me 4 separate times in the span of 10 minutes, and then he asked if the Wi-Fi password was written down anywhere, and I said it was taped under the router, and that was the whole conversation. Nothing dramatic, nothing that should have mattered. For the first week I barely saw him. He left early for his job, some marketing agency that wanted a photographer on staff, and came back late, and mostly stayed in his room with the door mostly closed. I'd hear him on the phone sometimes, low voice, laughing at something. I told myself it was probably Farah or a friend or a girlfriend, and I didn't think about it past that. The first time it changed was over eggs. I was standing at the stove on a Saturday morning, badly scrambling eggs because I've never learned to do it right, and he came out in a t-shirt and sweatpants, hair everywhere, and just stood there watching me ruin breakfast. "You're doing that wrong," he said. "I know. You want me to?" "No," I said too fast and then felt stupid about it, so I added, "I mean, sure, if you want." He took the pan from me like it was the easiest thing in the world, like we'd done this 100 times, and within 2 minutes he'd fixed what I'd broken. We ate standing up at the counter because I don't really use my kitchen table for anything but mail, and he asked about my job and I asked about his, and somewhere in there he mentioned an ex-girlfriend named Priya, and somewhere after that he mentioned, almost as an afterthought, a guy named Theo he dated for 4 months the year before. He said it the way you'd mention a flight layover. No pause, no look to check my reaction. I don't know why that detail lodged itself in me the way it did. I just remember standing there with a fork in my hand, nodding like it was nothing, while some part of my brain quietly rearranged furniture it had no business rearranging. I want to be clear that I wasn't out. Not to my family, not to David, not really to anyone except 2 friends from college who I saw twice a year at most. I dated men before, carefully, privately, in a version of my life that never touched the version my family knew. And I had a rule, an actual rule I'd made for myself years earlier, nothing that could blow back on the people I loved, nothing messy, nothing close to home. Kyan was, structurally speaking, about as close to home as a person could get. For a while that rule held. We fell into a rhythm that felt almost domestic in a way that embarrassed me a little. He'd cook badly and I'd critique it, and he'd threat to move out over the criticism, and neither of us meant any of it. He started leaving his camera on the kitchen table, and one night I picked it up without asking and started scrolling through the photos, and he caught me and didn't seem to mind. "That one's from the wedding," he said, looking over my shoulder at a photo of David laughing so hard his eyes were closed. "I like taking pictures when people don't know they're being looked at, they're more honest." I remember thinking that was a strange thing to say to me specifically, though I couldn't have told you why at the time. The weather turned in October the way it does here, fast, without warning, 1 week of sun and then 3 weeks of gray. There was a storm on a Thursday that knocked the power out across half the neighborhood, and I came home from work to find Kyan sitting on the kitchen floor with 3 candles lit and a laptop that had maybe 20% battery left. "Don't ask me why I'm on the floor," he said. It felt right. I wasn't going to ask. "You were thinking about it." I sat down across from him because there wasn't really anywhere else to sit that made sense, and we ended up staying there for 2 hours while the storm did its thing outside. He told me about his ex Theo in more detail than the layover version, how it ended badly over something that wasn't really about either of them, how his family still didn't fully know, how his mother suspected and never asked, and he wasn't sure if that was kindness or avoidance. "Do you think it's weird," he asked, "that I'd rather not know which one it is?" "No," I said, "I think not knowing is sometimes easier to live with than the answer." He looked at me for a second too long after I said that. I felt it more than I saw it in that low candlelight, and something in my chest did something uncomfortable and immediate, like a held breath I hadn't noticed I was holding. "You talk like someone with experience in not telling people things," he said. I laughed it off, said something about accountants having boring secrets, spreadsheets, and audits, nothing worth hiding. He let it go. But he kept looking at me a beat longer than the joke deserved, and I remember standing up to check on the candles just to have somewhere else to put my hands. That was the night I started being careful, not with him, with myself. I started noticing the shape of my own behavior in a way I hadn't before. The extra minute I spent picking a shirt on days I knew he'd be home early. The way I'd angle myself in the kitchen so I could see him without obviously watching him. The fact that I'd started, without deciding to, timing my evenings around whether he'd be there. I told myself it was nothing, then I told myself it was something, but a manageable thing. Then, one night in November, it stopped being manageable at all. We'd gone out, a work thing of mine actually, a low-key dinner for a colleague's birthday, and Kyan had come along because Farah asked him to drop something off nearby, and it made sense for him to just join us after. He was easy with my coworkers in a way that surprised me, funny without trying, and at one point my coworker Denise leaned over to me and said, not unkindly, "Your roommate's a catch. Is he single?" "I actually don't know," I said, which was a lie because I knew exactly who he'd dated last and roughly how long ago, which is not information you retain about someone you're not paying attention to. Kyan must have heard part of that because in the car afterward he brought it up. "Denise thinks I'm a catch," he said, grinning. "Denise thinks everyone under 30 is a catch." Ouch. I didn't mean it like that. "I know," he said, quieter now, "I'm messing with you." We drove for a while without talking. The radio was on low, something neither of us had chosen, just background noise filling a silence that had started to feel loaded in a way car silences aren't supposed to feel between two people who live together and share a Wi-Fi password. "Can I ask you something?" he said finally, eyes on the road because he was the one driving. "Sure. Are you seeing anyone?" The question landed wrong in my stomach, not because it was invasive but because I didn't know what version of the truth to give him. "No," I said, "not in a while." "Why not?" "Long story. I've got time, we're stuck in traffic." I looked out the window instead of at him. I had a rule for a long time about keeping certain parts of my life separate. It made things simpler. Simpler for who? That question stayed with me longer than it should have. Simpler for who? I didn't have a good answer, not when I was ready to say out loud in a car at 10 at night to my sister-in-law's brother, so I said something about being tired and changed the subject to whether he wanted food on the way home, and he let it go, but not entirely. I could feel him glance at me twice more before we got back. After that night, something between us shifted into a lower gear of honesty that neither of us named. He started leaving his door open more. I started staying in the kitchen longer after dinner instead of retreating to my room. We watched a show together over a couple of weeks, one episode a night, always sitting slightly closer on the couch than the episode before, in that way where neither person moves first but the distance still closes. It was during that show, actually, on a night in early December, that everything cracked open. We were maybe 20 minutes into an episode when his phone buzzed with a text from Farah. He read it, laughed, and turned the phone toward me. "She wants to know if we're behaving," he said. "I think she's suspicious we get along too well." I laughed too, but something about the word behaving sat wrong in my chest. A small stone dropped into still water. "What would we even be misbehaving about?" I said, aiming for light. He didn't answer right away. When I looked over, he wasn't looking at the TV anymore. "Can I say something?" he said, "and you don't get weird about it. I make no promises. I'm serious." "Okay, say it." He turned his whole body toward me on the couch, which felt like a bigger movement than it should have in a space that small. "I think you know I like you," he said. "Not like you as a roommate, the other kind, and I've been trying to figure out if I'm imagining that you might feel something back or if I'm about to make this incredibly awkward for both of us." My first instinct, the honest one, was relief, a strange, unearned relief, like something I'd been carrying without realizing how heavy it was had just been set down. My second instinct, arriving about 2 seconds later and much louder, was panic. Kyan, I said. You don't have to say anything back, he said quickly. I just needed to say it once out loud instead of just wondering forever. It's not that simple. Why not? Because you're Farah's brother, because you live in my house right now, because if this goes wrong I don't just lose you, I lose peace at every family dinner for the rest of my life. Because I'm 8 years older than you and that's not nothing, because you're scared, he said, not unkindly. You can just say that part. I didn't say anything for a moment because he was right, and I hated that he was right, and I hated more that some part of me had wanted him to say it out loud before I had to. I don't do this well, I said finally. Relationships, I never have, and doing it with someone this close to my actual life feels like setting fire to something I can't afford to lose. He nodded slowly and I watched something in his face close a little, not dramatically, just a door easing shut. Okay, he said, I hear you. Kyan. No, it's fine, he said, standing up. I asked, you answered, I'm not gonna make it weirder than it has to be. He went to his room and I sat on that couch for another 40 minutes not watching the show, feeling like I'd made the responsible choice and somehow also feeling like garbage about it. For the next week and a half we were polite to each other in the specific careful way that people are polite when something unspoken sits between them. He still cooked. I still critiqued it, though with less conviction. We didn't finish the show. His door stayed mostly closed again the way it had those first 2 weeks, except now the closed door felt like something I'd built instead of something that just was. I told myself this was the outcome I wanted: distance, manageable distance. A return to the rule I'd made for myself years ago, the one about keeping things separate and simple. Then, on a Sunday, David called and asked if I wanted to come to a family dinner Farah was putting together, nothing special, just everyone together before the holidays got busy. I almost said no. I said yes instead because saying no would have required an explanation I wasn't ready to give. Kyan was there, obviously. He was warm with everyone else the way he always was, funny with David, sweet with his mother, and carefully, deliberately normal with me, which somehow felt worse than if he'd been cold. At one point in the kitchen while everyone else was in the living room, I found myself alone with him for the first time in almost 2 weeks. You've been quiet, he said, not looking at me, focused on the dishes he was rinsing. I've had a lot going on. Sure. Kyan. You don't have to explain anything, he said. I got the message the first time. That's not, or I stopped because I didn't actually know how to finish that sentence honestly without saying something I'd been avoiding saying even to myself. I keep thinking about what you said, that's the problem. I haven't stopped thinking about it. And I don't know what to do with that because thinking about it doesn't change any of the reasons I gave you. He turned the water off and finally looked at me. Then what are the reasons actually protecting? He asked. Because from where I'm standing it kind of looks like you're protecting the idea of never having to explain yourself to anyone, not protecting me, not protecting Farah, just you staying comfortable. I didn't have a comeback for that because it was true in a way that stung exactly as much as true things are supposed to sting. I'm not saying this to be cruel, he added, quieter. I actually don't want to lose whatever this is either. Even the messed up half version we've got right now, I just don't think either of us is going to feel okay pretending the last 2 weeks were normal. David walked in right then, looking for more ice, and the conversation folded itself shut the way conversations do when they're interrupted at the worst possible moment. We didn't get another chance that night. I drove home separately from him on purpose and lay awake for a long time turning his question over. What are the reasons for actually protecting them? The truth, when I finally let myself sit with it, was uglier than I wanted it to be. I wasn't protecting Farah's peace of mind or David's comfort or even Kyan's reputation with his family. I was protecting myself from the specific fear of being known, really known, not the curated version I let people see, and having that knowledge land somewhere as permanent as my own family. It took me 4 more days to do anything about that realization, which is embarrassing to admit, because during those 4 days Kyan started actively making plans to move out. He mentioned an apartment across town, said the lease could start as early as January, said it casually over dinner in a way that was clearly meant to sound casual and didn't. That soon, I said. Feels like the right time. Because of me. He didn't answer that directly. It's a good apartment, he said instead, close to work. I sat with that for a second, feeling the specific kind of dread you get when you realize a door you've been quietly keeping shut is actually about to close for good, permanently, on its own, without you. Don't move out because of what I said, I told him, or didn't say. I'm not doing this to punish you, he said. I just can't keep living in the house of a guy I'm in love with while he pretends the conversation didn't happen. It's not sustainable. For me, I mean, maybe it's fine for you. He said the word love like it cost him something to say, and it landed in me the way certain sentences do, not loudly, but permanently, rearranging whatever furniture had been sitting halfway rearranged since that first breakfast of ruined eggs. I didn't sleep that night either. Around 1 in the morning, I got up and stood outside his door for a long, stupid stretch of time, not knocking, just standing there like an idiot in my own hallway, working up to something I couldn't name yet. Eventually, I knocked. He opened the door in a t-shirt, hair a mess, blinking against the hallway light. Everything okay? No, I said, not really. He waited, not saying anything, giving me room to either finish the sentence or walk away from it, and for once I didn't walk away. I've spent so long building a life where nothing risky gets close to the people I actually care about, I said. And somewhere in the middle of that you got close anyway and I panicked because you don't fit into the careful little box I built for myself. You're not supposed to be someone I could lose sleep over. You're Farah's brother, you live down the hall, you make terrible eggs. They're not terrible. They're a little terrible. He almost smiled at that, despite everything. I don't know how to do this without it being messy, I said. I don't know how to tell David or your mother or anyone without feeling like I'm handing them a version of myself I've spent 15 years keeping locked away. But I know that the alternative, watching you move out and pretend the last 2 months were nothing, feels worse than any of that mess. So I'm here, not with an answer, just here. He was quiet for a moment, studying me in that particular way he had, the one he'd once described as looking at people when they don't know they're being looked at, except this time I knew exactly how closely he was looking and I let him. That's not nothing, he said finally. It's not everything either. I know, I'll take it anyway. He stepped back from the doorway, not pulling me in, just leaving the space open, and I walked through it, not into anything physical, not that night, just into a conversation that lasted until almost 4 in the morning, sitting on the floor of his half-packed room, talking about Theo and Priya and my own long list of almosts, about what telling David might actually sound like. About whether love that starts this complicated is doomed to stay complicated or just starts that way and finds its own shape eventually. He didn't cancel the apartment, not that week. We didn't turn into some tidy resolved thing overnight because that isn't how any of this actually works, whatever the easy version of the story would have you believe. What changed was smaller than that and somehow bigger. He stopped closing his door. I stopped timing my evenings around avoiding him and started timing them around being there. Telling David happened almost 2 months later, over a beer on his back porch, badly and clumsily, in a conversation I'd rehearsed a dozen ways in my head and still managed to fumble completely when it actually came. He didn't say much at first. Then he asked one question, does he make you happy? And when I said yes, actually yes, he nodded like that, answered whatever else he might have wanted to ask, and told me Farah already had a theory anyway and had for weeks. I still don't know exactly what we are, Kyan and I, in the tidy way people like to define these things. He did eventually move into that apartment across town. Some nights I'm there. Some nights he's back in that same room down my hall, the one that used to be full of boxes I never unpacked, and is now somehow the room where I learned what it felt like to stop protecting myself from the one thing worth being known for. I think about that first night a lot, the garbage bags, the apology that wasn't necessary, the way he stood in that doorway like he wasn't sure he was allowed all the way in. I think about how long it took me to realize that the doorway was never the problem. I don't know how this ends yet. I'm not sure it's supposed to, not really, not in the way stories usually promise you an ending. Some nights that uncertainty still keeps me up. But it's a different kind of sleepless now, not the fear of being found out, just the strange, unfamiliar quiet of finally not hiding.